Good morning, everyone. This is a scheduled work session of the King County Board of Commissioners. I think it is the first of 3 work sessions covering aspects of the budget. So we'll go ahead and get started. I will turn it over to Administrator Vanderberg first, and then I think go down the line. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Steck and Commissioners. We are pleased to present to you the FY25 General Fund proposed budget. The budget's a result of a lot of work by many people, thorough analysis, input from our departments, also a review of economic conditions. Throughout this presentation, we'll be providing overview of proposed expenditures, expected revenues, and also cover county initiatives both in this presentation and then next week when we cover the non-general fund budget in a similar type meeting. We look forward to questions, discussions, feedback as we work together to finalize a budget that reflects the priorities of the board and the county and also our county values. So our schedule thus far. So on February 20, the 2024-25 budget guidelines were approved by Finance. March 26, the new position requests were approved by LHR. April 16, the CIP was approved by Finance. June 11, the proposed budget summary was distributed. And July 9, of course, we are reviewing the proposed general fund budget. So today what we'll be doing is summarizing key changes year over year, reviewing revenues, reviewing expenses by category, and also general fund expense by function. This chart probably looks a little familiar. It's changed slightly, but this is basically a look at comparing the 2024 adopted budget with the 2025 recommended budget, proposed budget, and basically looking at the additional revenues that are available to allocate. And then really it was a unique year for 2 reasons. The board had made a number of decisions in the previous year that impacted the next year's budget, such as implementing the first half of phase 1 of the correctional study, the correctional staffing study, and also we anticipated the patrol study being completed, and even though that decision hadn't been made, half the cost of the first phase of the patrol officer study implementation, and both staff and equipment. Also, of course, the board asked the state, and the state approved the new district judge, and so the staff and associated appurtenances for that position are in the budget. And then the 3% negotiated wage. We had most of our union contracts up. You approved 3 the previous year and 6 in the current year, and that added $3.7 million in wage increases to the budget. There was staffing approved for the new Brownfield Redevelopment Authority that the board created last year. Also, I think 4 new general fund positions at $286,000. And then a significant one also is the pension fund contribution increase, basically necessary to keep our OPEB at a good level. And of course, typically we put money into capital, that's at $2 million. And then also service charges, supplies, and increases of $2.2 million. And so that's kind of how we round out the budget for this year. Jeff, I think, will start. He'll give kind of the overview of the budget book, revenue, expenditures, and then, of course, we're available for questions.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Jeff.
Nice to be here today. Thanks for having us. So I'd like to put this up at the beginning of my presentation just to let you know that if you have any questions, most of them should be covered in this book. It's a very thorough book. It's very well prepared. So I just threw the cover up on there, and then of course, the table of contents shows where everything is located. But then the management letter, if you really want a quick summary of what happened to the budget, go through and read that management letter in detail, and it talks about each and every change pretty much throughout the entire budget process. So this is a very important document. Keep it handy if you have questions. Most of them should be answered in that particular publication. So we're going to move on to revenues. We're going to start with general fund sources by category. And obviously, as you all know, taxes are our largest portion of this. It's just under 58%, $139 million roughly in tax collections this year. This chart, or general fund sources by category, on page 26 of your budget book, if you're following along there. Charges for services, 12.6%, just under, or just over 30 million. Intergovernmental revenues, just under 31 million at 12.9%. You got investments, rents, and royalties at 8 million, 3.4%. Other revenue, 3.1%, 7.5 million. And then transfers in are 10% of the budget at just over $24 million. If you look at those in a little more chart format here, you can see we always present 3 years of data. 23 actuals are a little off, again, due to our 9-month budget transition, so that's not a great comparison yet. Future years, that'll be a better comparison. You can see, though, over last year, we had 226 million. This year, just over 240 million, or a 6.1% increase in revenues, and also a 6.1% increase in corresponding expenditures, which brings us a balanced budget. Moving on to revenues in more detail. Of course, taxes are always a big point of discussion. It's our biggest funding source for general fund. Taxes were up 8.3%, and just under 58% of the total revenues for the general fund, or $10.6 million increase from last year. The millage rate is 4.0987 for the general fund on a taxable value of $35.2 billion, which is up 4.5% from last year. When you look at taxes in a little more detail, we like to throw a chart in here on the Headley Amendment. You can see for many years the rollback didn't affect Kent County, but you can see starting in 2019, you started seeing some rollbacks, and cumulatively you can see we've lost $8 million in 2024 as a result of the Headley rollbacks. Since inception, it's just under, or just over $28 million. So you can see the permanent reduction as a result of the Headley Amendment that has continued to impact Kent County as well as many other agencies. Moving on to intergovernmental revenue, you can see just under $31 million, 12.9% of the budget. Revenue sharing is the largest portion of this. We estimated that at $15.29 million. After this was put together, the state did allocate or approve $30 million additional for revenue sharing, which is great news. However, they changed the formula and they don't have that calculated yet. I actually looked this morning to see if we had an update on what impact that would have in Kent County, and Treasury has not updated those numbers yet. So they're going to do it based upon, I think, population SEV or some different calculation than they've done it in the past. So they're still working on those calculations. So it's good news, but I'm not sure what impact over the long run that $30 million will have for Kent County, but I understand it is ongoing, so that's a good thing for revenue sharing. State grants and court equity are about $2.6 million. The local community stabilization, $3.7 million. And then local units contribution, about $1.7 million. Overall, again, 12.9% of the budget, but fairly unchanged from last year in total. Moving on for charges to services. Revenues are fairly flat in this category. It's just over 12% of the budget at $30.3 million. Again, very flat from last year. Some of the items in charges for services, some of the larger items include real estate transfer tax. We're estimating that at about $6 million. And again, we continue to see those revenues decline in the high interest rate market that we've been seeing. Recording fees are just under $2 million. Other services under $7 million, and then internal support just over $7 million. So those are some of the larger categories for charges for services. Investment, rents, and royalties. Again, mostly flat. It's up a little bit due to improving interest rate environments. As our treasurer will tell you, they've been able to capitalize on this rising rate. At least one good thing came from all of this is that we're making more in interest. Estimated at just over $8 million, or 3.4% of the budget, up 13.7% from last year. Other revenue, again, fairly flat, up 1.5% from last year, just under, or right around $7.5 million. Some of the larger categories in other revenue include state statute cost, private contributions and donations, just under $3 million. and then reimbursements from various entities at $2.7 million. And that's what makes up that category. Relatively small portion of our budget at 3.1%. And then lastly, on revenues, we have transfers in. This is up from 8.6% from last year, just over 10% of the budget to $24.2 million. The two largest changes here are an increase from the Correction Detention Fund, and then we're anticipating a $2.7 million transfer from the Lodging Excise Tax Fund back to the general fund as part of that $10 million reimbursement they owe us. Actually, by the end of this fiscal year, we intend on taking a couple of million of that as well, so we should be down around $5.5, $6 million that's owed back to the general fund by the end of 2025. So that's a high-level overview of revenues. Any questions on revenues before I
All
move
right.
to expenses?
Thank you for that summary of $240 million.
Yep.
All right, questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Ponstein.
So, Jeff, thanks for being here.
Can you put your mic, Commissioner, can you put your mic on, please? Thanks.
I'm live. I mean, it's a great overview of where we're at. What do we look like 5, 6 years down the road? I mean, this free money for everyone that's coming from the federal government's going to eventually come to an end. I don't see inflation changing any bit. What does the future look outside of 2025?
So, it's always hard to predict the future. You know, things like great recessions and COVID-19 come up. Absent anything out of the ordinary, I think the county's in a really strong position. We continue to see very strong growth in SEV and taxable value. The state continues to grow as well, as provided by $30 million additional revenue sharing for counties. I think we'll get over this housing bubble hopefully at some point, and the real estate transfer taxes and things will start coming back. So again, interest rates are up in an environment like this, so that supports the general fund. You know, the biggest concern, I guess, is personnel expense. It's always a large part of the budget, as we'll see in a little bit. Although we've just negotiated 5 years of contracts for most of the groups, so that should be a steady, at least known cost for the county going forward. So, you know, absent anything that we can't predict, I think the future looks pretty good, actually. So,
Thank you.
All right, other questions or comments? I do have a couple, I'm sorry, Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. In looking through some of the different funds, it looks like there's a pretty significant increase in revenue collected and expected for the Drug Law Enforcement Fund. And I know that I'm assuming a big portion of that is fines and forfeitures. Can you speak to like the percentage of that fund and the expectation for 2025 that is projected for that?
for the drug law fund. I did not prepare for that today because we're doing just general fund reviews, but we can certainly get that, and it should be part of the presentation. What is it, next week, Thursday, I believe?
Or, yes.
When we cover all the other funds. Would you like to hold off until then, or you want an answer prior to that presentation?
If I could get an answer before that, then maybe I
Okay.
won't have any questions at that one.
I'm sorry? Oh, the sheriff is here too, if you'd like to speak to it now. I put her on the spot.
Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning. So that really is federal forfeiture funds. We do have some funds that have been accumulating and we haven't been budgeting to spend them. We've started a new pilot program where we are starting to spend some of those dollars predicted into next year, which is why you're seeing them show up now in our budget. We're doing some work at the airport that was previously done by the Met team that's now dissolved. We're also doing some work at the post office. So because both of those would be federal forfeiture funds, you're seeing that money predicted in there. Yep.
All right, other questions or comments? My question, Jeff, had to do with the current proposed change in revenue sharing. I know you don't have the precise amount yet. Do you have any estimate on the range of what that would involve in our budget?
Again, I've looked through several sources and there was nothing posted on the web on what that allocation is going to be. Again, they changed the formula completely for that particular portion. And I don't understand the relationship. I think it's based, I believe they said population and value, taxable value or SEV of your county. And I don't know if that's an inverse relationship or not. That wasn't explained, and I couldn't find anything on the data. So I hate to guess. I really don't know at this point.
So no speculative numbers. Whatever that number is, unless it comes out really quick, we will go ahead and approve a budget without those additional numbers and then do an amendment after that.
Yeah, it's a revenue source. We probably
Right.
wouldn't need to amend revenues unless we allocate additional expenses specifically for those revenues. So.
Okay, okay. The other question I had to do with, so if interest rates were to drop and we suddenly see a fairly significant increase in the buying and selling of real estate, one of the impacts of that will be the step-up values in our revenues, right?
Sure. Typically, when properties transfer, yes, that taxable value is lifted equal to a fair market value of what, not exactly the purchase price necessarily, but whatever the study equates to a fair market value. So that helps with our cap growth, overall growth, yes. Is that your question?
Does that then lead to a further modification under Headley, taking our rates back down next year?
Potentially. A lot of that has to do with the inflation rate as well, though, and overall growth. So there's, I don't know if anyone from our equalization department is here. I'm not seeing anyone. They could explain the formula a little better than I could. So there's a bunch of pieces that fit into that calculation. Like last year, we had a very high inflation. There was no Headley rollback, but this year it was put in place again because of the calculation. So it's kind of hard to predict.
Right.
There's a lot of variables into it. But.
I guess I'm getting at that, and I've had some folks ask, well, once the market breaks free, when the interest rates come down, then you guys are going to see this huge influx of cash coming into the county. And it strikes me that the dynamics are, yes, there is an inflow that could come in, but there's also adjustments on the outside. So it's not necessarily a panacea of cash.
Correct. You can't grow your taxable value too quickly, or the Headley Amendment kicks in and lowers your overall value to keep it in that range. So that's exactly right.
Okay. Other questions on revenue? Yes, Commissioner Green, or Vice Chair Green.
I had just a really high-level question. Jeff, when we're looking at this, I know you mentioned we've had the challenge of the change in the year, but now that we're into looking at 24 adopted versus 25 proposed, that should be closer to an apples-to-apples comparison. We're talking about the delta between the two of them?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
I believe that was an overall 6.1% increase from last year, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, no other questions on revenues? Okay.
Okay, moving on to expenses. So we're going to start with general fund uses by category. And this is on page 26 of your budget summary, if you're following along there. You can see personnel is always one of the largest costs of any fund, 53.7%, or just under $129 million for the general fund of personnel costs. That includes salaries, wages, benefits, health, pension, OPEB. All those costs are rolled up into that personnel category. Supplies are fairly small, $3.8 million, 1.6% of the budget. Other services and charges, 21.8%, or just over $52 million. Capitals, $6 million, 2.5%. And then transfers out are always a large category, $55 million. That supports many of our other funds across Kent County. So here's a little more detailed look on general fund total expenses. Again, it brings back the comparisons from 23 and versus 24. You can see expenditures are up just over 8% from last year's budget, but transfers are down. So overall, again, that 6.1% increase in total expenses. Personnel is up 8.6%, $10.2 million, and again, that includes the negotiated wage increases that Al spoke to, the personnel additions and benefit changes. Capital is up just under $2 million, and that was a result that previously we had funded a lot of the cameras and ongoing maintenance of the sheriff's vehicles in the capital budget. We moved those to operations because it's more of an operational expense. So that caused quite a bit of an additional cost there, but it lowered the cost in the capital fund, so that was kind of a transfer. Some of the other service line items include inmate health, attorney's fees, software maintenance, all changed. And then there is a contingency for the MPP study that's ongoing to see what if there's any additional dollar impacts for anything related to that particular study. So that is it by category. I'll move on to more specifics by function next, unless there's any questions on category.
Let's go through the next one, and then we'll ask
Okay.
in general on expenses.
So this is general fund uses by function now, and now you get to see particularly what everything is spent on in the individual departments. We'll start with public safety, 39.3% of the total, just over $94 million. Recreation and culture, 3.2%, $7.7 million. See the judicial, 30.6 million, 12.8%. Community and economic development, 0.7%. It's a fairly small portion of the general fund, but again, we have the lodging excise tax fund and other policies that help with the economic development of Kent County. See transfers out, 23.1%, 55 million. Public works, very small, 0.4 in the general fund, and then 19.6 for general government. And 3.7 for social services, just under $9 million. Again, this is a general government category. Graphically wise, or I'm sorry, comparison wise, again, up. General government was up 4.3% over the 24 adopted, and it's just under 20% of the budget. And then the next slide will show you a little bit what's in the general government. So you can see equalization share, 4%, clerk share, 8.6%, facilities management, 33%. You see fiscals just under 10, 9.6%, human resources at 6%, IT at just under 20%, and policy admin 16%. And then treasurer rounds it out at 3.2%. So of the total 46, just under $47 million, those are the functions that are funded in that category. Moving on to public safety. Change my sheet here. Again, $94.4 million, just under 40% of the total. It's up 11.5% over 2024. And that $95 million is spread this way. You can see jail, 55.7% of that total. Animal shelters, a pretty small piece at 3.2%. Dispatch, 7%. Sheriff administrations, 1.4%. And then rural patrol, of course, is the next largest one at 32.4% of that total. And then emergency management also fits in there at just 0.3% of that budget. So that's how the public safety dollars are allocated. Again, $94.4 million. Moving on to judicial, you can see it's up 7% from last year, $30.6 million, just under 13% of the total proposed 25 budget. The judicial system is broken out this way. We've got 58.1% to circuit court. The district court's 12.3%. Probate, 9.1, prosecutors, 20.4, and then probation, a very, very small amount at 0.1%. So I can show you the overall programs that are funded with the $30.6 million allocation. Moving on to social services, it's up 1.2%, fairly flat from last year, just under $9 million. Social services makes up 3.7% of the proposed general fund budget. And those are broken out into these categories. We have substance abuse services, 31.8%. The ME, medical examiner, 23% of the total. Mental health, 22.9%. Other social services, 16.8%. And then health and human services, 5.5%. That's how that $9 million is distributed. Community and economic development, fairly small piece of general fund, 1.6 million, 0.7% of the total. It is up 18% from last year. Again, high percentage increase, small dollar increase due to the small part of the budget. And that is broken up. The clerk, register of deeds, 47.4%. Cooperative extension, 33.6%, and then economic development, 19 rounds off that category of just under $1.6 million. And then transfers out, up. I'm sorry, it's down a bit, 0.7% down, $55.4 million. It's 23% of the budget. You can see how this is broken out. We send 25.5% to the child care fund, 21.4% to the health fund, 25% to the CIP. Friend of court gets 5.3%. Special projects just under 10%. 6.4% to the debt for debt service, and then 6.7% to other. So that's how that $55 million in transfers out is allocated. And I believe that should wrap up the overall review of expenditures. So I'm happy to answer questions.
All right, questions on the expense side of this? Commissioner Hennessy.
I'm a touch confused on what the sheriff's department, on
Carol, can you turn on your mic, please? Sorry.
I'm just a little confused on the sheriff's budget and the proportion it is of our total budget and expenditures. On page 9, it says that the sheriff's budget represents 48.4% of the proposed general fund operating budget, but I thought your slides here was more like, 10% lower than that, in that area. I'm just confused how to think about that portion of our general fund spending.
Let me look at that real quick. Yeah, so public safety, 94.4%, 39.3% of the total on the summary page. And then what,
I'm looking at page 9, the numbers on page 9 and the percentage there. And the review of the total thing.
I guess I'm still confused by your question. Am I missing something?
I'm confused just how I look at the sheriff's budget in terms of our total general fund
Okay.
expenditures.
We have it at 94.4 million, just under. It's 39.3% of the total general fund expenditure budget.
It's at 39%,
Correct.
but on page 9, it says it's 48.4%. That's what I'm having trouble reconciling.
Can you help me out, Marvin? I'm not understanding or I'm not seeing the discrepancy, sorry.
Good morning, Marvin.
Good morning. What page 9 refers to is the operating budget. It doesn't include the transfers out, so it's a bigger number. So if you look at the statements, when you get into the general fund by category, you'll see the operating total, and then you'll see other transfers out and lapse, and then you get the grand total. So it's 48% of the operating total. The other thing, when you're looking at this presentation, you look at public safety, that also includes the animal shelter, which is not entirely the sheriff's office too. So that'll distort that number a bit also.
Okay, thank you.
So they're not apples and apples comparison.
Right.
Okay.
Thanks, Marvin.
Okay. I'm sorry, Carol, did you have Commissioner Hennessy, did you have a follow-up? Okay. Anyone else on expense side of this? Just a couple of questions, Jeff. Again, on the judicial side of the expense increase, how much of that is related to the additional judgeship?
I believe it was right around 635,000.
It was like a $2 million total increase from last year.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it here in the list. I'm not seeing it right off the top, but it's right around 635,000 is what that increase was for the,
Okay.
for the judge and the position, the support positions, yes.
All right. And then on the social service expenses, does that include, I'm sorry, you found
I
the,
did, 630, yep.
you were right, okay. Does the social services expense include the $2 million contribution to the CMH on an annual basis? To Network 180?
Yes, correct.
All right, and that number hasn't changed,
It's a flat number, yeah.
pretty flat, okay.
Yep.
Any other questions on expenses? I don't see any others.
Okay, that leads us to next steps. July 18th, we have a scheduled another session like this to go over non-general fund budgets. July 18th, establish the date for the public hearing, which would be August 8th. August 6th, we're intending for finance to take action on the annual grant budgets. And then August 22 is the scheduled date for the board to have the adoption of the 25 budget.
So again, as far as work sessions are concerned, the next work session is next week.
Next week, Thursday, I believe,
Thursday.
after the board meeting. Yes.
Commissioner Hennessy?
At a later point, we're going to set the public hearing. We often, in the past, have set that public hearing on the budget in the evening, had an evening meeting for that. And I don't think we have any evening meetings this year. Is there any consideration for, changing that to?
The public hearing right now is scheduled for August 8th, correct?
Correct, yes.
8:30 in the morning.
Right.
Yep.
The inquiry is, should
Why-
we consider moving that to a
Evening time,
evening time?
or having an evening meeting somewhere along the line?
That's a different question, but
They're,
yeah.
they're sort of, they're combined in that traditional, I will say traditionally, but the last few years, that, since COVID, things have changed, but it was always the evening meeting of the year when we would do that public hearing.
We can certainly take that into consideration, and if folks have perspectives, I suspect I'll hear pluses and minuses on that potential.
But, I mean, I don't care how it works out, but I do think it's worth consideration.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. All right,
I do
other,
remember a conversation on that a few years back, and it was purposely moved back to the daytime meeting, and I don't remember 100% of the reasons behind it, but there was a discussion on it at that time.
I suspect it had something to do with the percentage or the depth of public participation, and we'll go through that same consideration, whether we gain or lose if we go to the evening. But fair question, certainly we'll give it a thought, and then if you have other considerations from any commissioners on that potential, let me know. All right, any other questions on the process? I don't see any. Is there anything else, Jeff?
No, that's it for me.
Anything else, Al?
Commissioner Burrow can't ask any questions.
He, no,
Stay after class. I was listening to catch up.
he asked for a private meeting afterwards, which we, of course, will accommodate. All right, if there's nothing else, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned.
Thank you.